on the Lighthouse inheritance. Marcus Chen had never expected to inherit anything from his great-uncle Harold, let alone a lighthouse perched on a remote cliff overlooking the Pacific. The old man had been a recluse, living alone for decades in what most people considered an abandoned structure. When the lawyer handed Marcus the keys, he mentioned something odd about a room that had been sealed for over 50 years. The drive to the lighthouse took 3 hours through winding coastal roads. As Marcus pulled up to the weathered building, he couldn't help but feel a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. The lighthouse stood like a white sentinel against the gray sky, its paint peeling and windows dark. The surrounding area was barren except for hardy coastal grass and a few twisted trees bent by constant ocean winds. Inside, the lighthouse was surprisingly well maintained. Uncle Harold had clearly spent his final years keeping the place functional, though Marcus couldn't understand why. The lighthouse hadn't been operational for decades, yet all the equipment seemed to be in working order. Solar panels on the roof powered modern electronics alongside the vintage fixtures. On his first night, Marcus decided to explore every corner of his inheritance. The living quarters were cramped but comfortable, filled with books about astronomy, radio technology, and strangely theoretical physics. Harold's journals were scattered throughout, filled with observations about celestial patterns and radio frequencies that made little sense to Marcus. As midnight approached, Marcus climbed the spiral staircase to the lamp room at the top. The massive Fresnel lens caught moonlight and scattered it into rainbow fragments across the walls. From this height, he could see for miles in every direction. The ocean stretched endlessly to the west, while jagged cliffs and dark forests extended inland. It was then that Marcus noticed something unusual. In Harold's final journal entry, dated just a week before his death, there was a crude map of the lighthouse with an X marked on what appeared to be a sealed door on the second floor. The entry read, "They're coming back tonight. I can hear them in the frequencies. The door must remain locked. Marcus will understand when the time comes." Curious and slightly unnerved, Marcus descended to the second floor and began searching for this mysterious door. Behind a tall bookshelf filled with technical manuals, he found what he was looking for. The door was painted the same color as the wall, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Heavy steel bolts had been welded across the frame, and a thick chain secured it further. As Marcus examined the door, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The metal showed signs of impact from the other side, as if something had been trying to break out rather than break in. Deep dents and scratches covered the surface, and the steel bolts showed stress marks from repeated pressure. The wind outside began to pick up, causing the lighthouse to creak and groan. Marcus decided to postpone his investigation and headed back downstairs. As he prepared for bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move in his peripheral vision, and the sound of the wind through the structure created an almost musical quality that reminded him of voices. Around 2 in the morning, Marcus was jolted awake by a sound he couldn't immediately identify. It was rhythmic, like knocking, but far too loud and deep to be human hands on wood. The sound seemed to be coming from directly above him, from the second floor where the sealed door waited. Grabbing a flashlight, Marcus crept upstairs. The knocking continued, steady and purposeful. As he approached the hidden door, the sound grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from outside the lighthouse. It was definitely coming from behind the sealed door. Marcus pressed his ear against the cold metal. The knocking stopped immediately, as if whatever was on the other side knew he was listening. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, clear as day, he heard a voice speaking in a language he didn't recognize but somehow understood. "The Guardian is dead. The new one has arrived. We must return to complete our work." Heart pounding, Marcus backed away from the door. The voice continued, joined by others. creating a chorus of alien sounds that seemed to resonate through the very walls of the lighthouse. As the voices grew louder, the lighthouse's vintage radio equipment throughout the building began to crackle to life, picking up signals that shouldn't have existed. The radio in Uncle Harold's study was the loudest, broadcasting a mixture of static and what sounded like coordinates. Marcus rushed to the study and found Harold's logbooks open to pages of mathematical calculations and star charts. According to the notes, Harold had been tracking some kind of celestial event that occurred every 73 years. As Marcus studied the charts, the pieces began to fall into place. The lighthouse wasn't just a navigation aid for ships. It was some kind of beacon for something else entirely. Harold's notes indicated that the structure had been built on this specific location because of unique electromagnetic properties in the cliff face. The knocking from the sealed door intensified, now accompanied by what sounded like machinery starting up. The lighthouse began to vibrate slightly, and Marcus could see lights beginning to flicker in the lamp room above. Whatever was behind that door was awakening, and it had been waiting for someone to take Harold's place. Marcus realized that his great-uncle hadn't been a recluse by choice. He had been a guardian, keeping something contained that was never meant to be released. The inheritance wasn't just property, it was a responsibility that had been passed down through their family for generations. As the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, the knocking finally stopped. The radio equipment fell silent, and the lighthouse returned to its normal state of quiet isolation. But Marcus knew this was only temporary. The lighthouse inheritance. Continued Marcus spent the next 3 days buried in Harold's research, piecing together a story that defied everything he thought he knew about reality. The journals went back nearly a century, started by his great-grandfather, then continued by Harold's father, and finally by Harold himself. Each generation had added their own observations and discoveries to what was essentially a family chronicle of contact with something not of this world. The sealed door wasn't keeping something out, it was keeping something in. 73 years ago, Harold's father had been the lighthouse keeper when something crashed into the cliff face during a massive storm. The impact had been dismissed by authorities as a landslide, but the family knew better. They had found wreckage that was clearly not of human origin, along with survivors who weren't quite dead, but weren't exactly alive either. According to the detailed accounts, these beings existed in a state between dimensions, able to phase in and out of physical reality. The electromagnetic field generated by the lighthouse's unique location kept them anchored to this dimension, preventing them from either fully materializing or returning to wherever they had come from. Harold's grandfather had made the decision to contain them rather than report the incident to authorities, believing that humanity wasn't ready for such knowledge. Marcus found technical diagrams showing how the lighthouse had been modified over the decades. What appeared to be vintage equipment was actually sophisticated technology designed to maintain a specific electromagnetic frequency. The solar panels weren't just for power. They were part of a complex array that monitored and adjusted the containment field 24 hours a day. The beings behind the door had spent decades studying their prison and their captors. They had learned to communicate through radio frequencies and had been trying to convince each successive guardian to release them. According to Harold's notes, they claimed to be explorers from another dimension, accidentally trapped in ours during a routine scientific expedition. Marcus might have been tempted to believe them, except for one crucial detail he found in his great-grandfather's journal. Before being contained, the beings had been attempting to establish some kind of beacon that would guide others of their kind to Earth. The lighthouse location wasn't random. It was a strategic position for whatever larger plan they had been implementing. On the fourth night, Marcus decided to attempt direct communication. He had found Harold's radio equipment that was specifically tuned to frequencies the beings could use. Setting up the system according to his uncle's detailed instructions, he activated the communication array just after midnight. The response was immediate. The voice that came through the speakers was clear and articulate, speaking perfect English with an accent that seemed to shift and change as it spoke. "You are not Harold. Harold is dead. You are young, inexperienced. You do not understand the burden you have inherited." Marcus steadied his voice. "I understand enough. I know what you are and why you're contained." "Do you? Your family has imprisoned us for nearly a century based on assumptions and fear. We are scientists, explorers. Our only crime was being in the wrong place when dimensional barriers shifted during your planet's magnetic storm. Then why were you building a beacon? Why were you trying to contact others?" There was a pause before the voice continued, and Marcus detected what might have been surprise. "You have read the records more carefully than we anticipated. Yes, we were establishing a research station. Our people have been studying dimensional variations in this region of space for millennia. Earth exists at a nexus point where multiple dimensions intersect. We came to study this phenomenon." Marcus wasn't buying it entirely. "And the others you were trying to contact?" "Our research team. We were separated during the dimensional shift. Some made it back to our realm, others were scattered across various dimensions. The beacon would have helped them locate us and provided a stable anchor point for rescue." As the conversation continued, Marcus began to understand the complexity of the situation his family had been dealing with. The beings weren't necessarily hostile, but they also weren't entirely truthful. They had been studying Earth and humanity for much longer than they claimed, and their research had implications that went far beyond simple scientific curiosity. Through careful questioning, Marcus learned that these beings could perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously. They had been watching human development across different dimensional variations, studying how choices and events played out differently in parallel realities. Earth wasn't just a random scientific curiosity, it was a crucial point in dimensional stability. "Your species is unique," the voice explained. "Most intelligent life develops in single-dimensional spaces. Humans exist across multiple dimensions without being aware of it. Every choice you make, every action you take, creates ripples across dimensional boundaries. You are naturally multidimensional beings trapped in single-dimensional perception." This revelation was staggering. According to the beings, humanity's destiny was tied to dimensional science in ways that could revolutionize existence itself. But they also admitted that their own people were divided on how to handle humanity's emergence as a dimensional force. "Some of our kind believe humans should be guided, taught to harness their natural abilities. Others believe your species is too chaotic, too unpredictable to be trusted with dimensional technology." The beacon we were building would have determined which faction gained control of this sector. Marcus realized that his family hadn't just been containing alien explorers. They had been preventing Earth from becoming the center of an interdimensional conflict. The Lighthouse wasn't just a prison. It was a neutral zone, keeping dangerous knowledge from both sides of an alien political divide. As dawn approached, the beings made an offer that Marcus had been expecting. "Release us, and we will teach you. Your family has proven responsible, patient. You could become humanity's guides into dimensional science. The knowledge we could share would advance your species by thousands of years." The temptation was enormous. Marcus could see the potential benefits, but he could also see the risks. Harold had spent his entire life weighing the same decision, ultimately choosing to maintain the status quo rather than risk unleashing forces beyond human understanding or control. But Marcus was younger, more optimistic about humanity's potential. The Lighthouse Inheritance. Conclusion. Marcus spent 2 weeks developing his plan before approaching the beings again. He had studied every journal entry, every technical specification, and every philosophical debate his predecessors had recorded. More importantly, he had been researching current human scientific capabilities and international cooperation frameworks. The world had changed dramatically since 1950, and Marcus believed humanity might finally be ready for controlled contact. His plan was audacious but carefully structured. Instead of simply releasing the beings or maintaining indefinite containment, he proposed a gradual introduction program that would allow for scientific exchange while maintaining strict security protocols. The Lighthouse would become a research facility, staffed by an international team of scientists who could study dimensional science under carefully controlled conditions. When Marcus presented his proposal during their next communication session, the being's response was thoughtful. "Your plan shows wisdom beyond your years, young guardian. Previous generations focused on the choice between isolation and freedom. You propose cooperation, but such a plan requires trust from both sides." "Trust has to start somewhere," Marcus replied. "My family has proven we can keep secrets and honor commitments. Your people have shown patience and restraint despite decades of imprisonment. Maybe it's time to try something different." The beings agreed to a test period. They would share limited knowledge about dimensional science, while Marcus worked to establish the international research consortium he had outlined. If the initial exchange proved beneficial and secure, they would consider broader cooperation. The first breakthrough came within days. The beings shared a mathematical formula that described dimensional intersection points. When Marcus transmitted this information to a physicist friend at MIT, the response was immediate and dramatic. The formula solved several theoretical problems that had puzzled scientists for decades and opened entirely new fields of research. Marcus established contact with carefully selected scientists around the world, revealing limited information about his discovery and proposing an international research initiative. The response was overwhelming. Within months, he had assembled a team of the world's leading experts in theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, and related fields. The Lighthouse was transformed into a secure research facility. The beings provided technical specifications for equipment that could safely interface with their dimensional state, allowing for controlled communication and knowledge transfer. The research team was amazed by the insights they gained, making advances in energy technology, space travel, and fundamental physics at an unprecedented rate. But the real test came when the beings revealed the truth about dimensional politics. Just as they had warned, other factions of their people had been searching for the lost research team. Some were peaceful scientists interested in cooperation, but others viewed humanity as a potential threat to dimensional stability. The aggressive faction arrived 6 months after Marcus began his research program. Their approach was detected by the early warning systems the beings had helped design, giving the research team time to prepare. When the alien vessels materialized in Earth's orbit, humanity was ready with both defensive technologies and diplomatic protocols. The encounter that followed would have been impossible without the months of preparation. The aggressive aliens expected to find a primitive world with no knowledge of dimensional science. Instead, they discovered a planet that had been rapidly advancing in dimensional technology under careful guidance from their lost colleagues. Marcus found himself serving as humanity's primary negotiator, using knowledge gained from the Lighthouse beings to communicate with the alien factions. The aggressive aliens were surprised to discover that humans had natural dimensional abilities and were already developing their own approaches to dimensional science. The peaceful faction of aliens arrived shortly after, leading to a complex three-way negotiation above Earth's atmosphere. Marcus represented humanity, but he was no longer just a lighthouse keeper. He had become Earth's first dimensional diplomat. The resolution was elegant in its simplicity. Earth would become a neutral meeting ground for dimensional research, with humans serving as mediators between different alien factions. The Lighthouse would remain a research facility, but it would be expanded into a full dimensional science institute open to researchers from multiple species and dimensions. The beings who had been contained for decades were finally free, but they chose to remain as advisors and researchers. They had grown attached to Earth and were fascinated by humanity's unique approach to dimensional problems. Their imprisonment had become a collaboration that benefited everyone involved. Marcus realized that his family's generations of guardianship had prepared humanity for this moment. By keeping the secret and maintaining careful control, they had allowed both species to develop the wisdom and patience necessary for successful cooperation. If the beings had been released immediately, or if their presence had been revealed to an unprepared world, the outcome could have been catastrophic. The lighthouse still stood on its cliff, but now it served as a beacon of hope rather than a prison. Ships from multiple dimensions used it as a navigation point for peaceful visits to Earth. The building itself had been expanded into a campus where beings from various realities worked together on problems that affected multiple dimensions. Marcus often stood in the original lamp room, looking out over the ocean and reflecting on how his life had changed. He had inherited what he thought was an abandoned lighthouse and discovered he was heir to humanity's greatest responsibility. The choice he made had transformed Earth from an isolated world into a crucial player in interdimensional civilization. The beings had been right about one thing. Humanity's natural dimensional abilities made them unique among intelligent species. Under careful guidance, humans were developing technologies and insights that impressed even ancient civilizations. Earth was becoming known throughout dimensional space as a world of innovative thinkers and natural diplomats. But perhaps the most important lesson Marcus learned was about the nature of leadership and responsibility. His predecessors had made difficult choices based on the information and circumstances of their time. His own choice had been different, but it built on their foundation of careful stewardship and patient wisdom. The lighthouse had taught him that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in dramatic action, but in taking responsibility for consequences that extend far beyond your own life. His great-uncle Harold had spent decades in isolation, maintaining a secret that protected both humanity and alien refugees. Marcus had found a way to honor that commitment while moving forward into a future none of them could have imagined. As ships from distant dimensions passed safely through Earth's space, guided by the lighthouse beacon, Marcus knew that his family's long guardianship had finally achieved its ultimate purpose. They had protected a secret until humanity was ready to handle the truth, and they had prepared the way for a future where Earth stood proudly among the stars as a beacon of cooperation and innovation. The locked door had been opened at last, but instead of releasing ancient dangers, it had opened doorways to infinite possibilities. The lighthouse on the cliff had become humanity's first step into a larger universe, proving that sometimes the best solutions come from patience, wisdom, and the courage to try something completely new. In the end, Marcus understood that he hadn't just inherited a lighthouse. He had inherited humanity's future, and he had helped guide it toward the stars. The world had changed dramatically since his great-grandfather had first made the decision to contain the beings. Technology had advanced, international cooperation was possible, and perhaps most importantly, humanity was already beginning to discover dimensional science on its own. "I need time to think," Marcus said finally. "Time is something we have in abundance," the voice replied. "But consider this. Dimensional barriers in this region are naturally weakening. Within a few years, we will either find a way to escape, or others will find a way to reach us. The choice is whether humanity is prepared for what comes next, or remains ignorant until it's too late." After ending the communication, Marcus sat in Harold's study watching the sunrise. The decision he faced would affect not just his own life, but potentially the future of human civilization. His family had been guardians of a secret that could change everything, and now he had to decide whether to continue their isolation or take the greatest risk in human history. The beings behind the door had given him much to consider, but Marcus was beginning to formulate his own plan. Maybe there was a third option his predecessors hadn't considered, one that involved neither blind release nor indefinite containment, but careful, controlled contact that could benefit humanity while protecting it from the larger dimensional conflicts the beings had described. Whatever was behind that door was patient, but it wasn't going to wait forever. Looking through Harold's extensive notes, Marcus found references to the visitors and their return schedule. According to the calculations, they had been trying to break through for decades, but something about the electromagnetic field generated by the lighthouse kept them contained. Harold had spent his entire adult life maintaining this prison, and now it was Marcus's turn. The responsibility was overwhelming, but as Marcus watched the sun rise over the ocean, he felt a strange sense of purpose. His great-uncle had chosen him for a reason, and somewhere in these journals and calculations was the knowledge he needed to continue the work. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with and why his family had been chosen as guardians of secrets that could change everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe.